everyone, Rachel here from Curly Quilt. Today I thought I would do a video all about fabric. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on quilting cottons. I'm going to briefly go over some basic other types of fabrics that are out there. Then I wanted to talk about all the different types of quilting cottons that you can find, some designers and manufacturers that you might have heard of, and then I wanted to go into how I prep and how I cut my fabric for creating quilts. So let's go ahead and get started. So as you know, if you've ever been to Joann's, or even if you just go clothes shopping a lot, you know there's all kinds of different fabrics out there. There you have natural fibers like cottons, and then there's a lot of synthetic fibers that exist now. There's polyester, there's rayon, there's spandex, there's knits, which can be a blend, or usually a blend of, natural and synthetic fibers. And so I wanted to talk about how fabric is made. Traditional cotton fabric is made on a loom. If you've ever seen a loom in action, you know that there is vertical lines and then horizontal lines where the threads are woven together. So you basically have your vertical and then your horizontal, and then they're all woven together to create a grid. And so what that does is when you have cotton fibers coming together like that, it creates a really strong bond. It's called, I believe, a warp and a weft. And so what that does is it makes it really structurally sound vertically and horizontally. Now, if you've ever cut fabric on a diagonal, if you're working with triangles or something like that, on the bias, which goes diagonally around fabric, it's really stretchy and it warps, it distorts it and things like that when you pull fabric diagonally. So cotton fabrics in particular have a warp and a weft, so vertical and horizontal lines that come together to make a grid and make them really strong. And that's why at the beginning and end of cotton fabrics, when you get them off the bolt, they'll have what's called a selvage, right? These are these little guys here. So again, it is woven, but at the beginnings, it's woven a little bit more snugly, tightly. I don't know if you guys can see that. Let's see if I can get it to zoom. And so what they do is that's where you begin the weaving process of the fabric, and then that's where you seal it off at the end. Other types of synthetic fibers, those are going to be created differently. To be perfectly honest, I don't know, because that's not really what I work with. But if you have like a knit shirt, those are stretchy. This is a knit. It also has a selvage. So when you buy it at the store, it has, or when you buy it off the bolt, it'll have a selvage. So there's all kinds of different types of fabrics out there. They're all made differently. The biggest difference between them is the fibers that they're made out of. Cotton is a natural fiber, and so it is more readily available. But at the same time, because of the world that we live in, cotton fabric is actually going to be more expensive, usually than a polyester or a cotton poly blend. That's why when you go to the store and buy a pre-made or ready-made shirt, they tend to be made out of rayon and polyesters because it is so much cheaper to make clothing out of those types of fabrics. And then cotton fabric also comes in many different forms. Quilting cottons, you're gonna feel, when you touch them, you're gonna feel them really soft. They're more flat. They don't have like what's called a nap, so there's no loft on it at all. And then you have things like flannel, which have a bit more of a fuzzy feeling, and it all has to do with the thread count, how they're woven, things like that create the different types of cotton fabric. You also have things like muslin, which is like a raw cotton fabric, and that's why when you buy this off of the bolt at a fabric store, it tends to be really cheap, like $2–3 a yard, because it is a more raw form of fabric. Obviously, it doesn't have any print on it, no designs or anything like that. So the big difference between, other garment fabrics and cotton fabrics is how they're woven, how they're created. And then the differences between different cotton fabrics that you'll find at fabric stores has to do with thread counts. So a quilting cotton that has a really high thread count is going to be much more expensive than, say, a less expensive flannel. Or this is a design that I got at Joann's when I first started sewing, so it was much less expensive. Now, another difference, so when you find quilting cottons that have a high thread count, they tend to be what's called designer fabrics. So you have a major manufacturer. So this is Monkey Wrench fabric by Tula Pink, who is a very well-known fabric designer. Free Spirit is the company that manufactures her different fabric lines. There's other companies out there you've probably heard of, like Riley Blake, Moda, Kona, Wilmington Fabrics, QT Fabrics. There's tons of different ones out there, and those are manufacturers. And then designers, people like Tula Pink or Calf Facet, or maybe even Rashida Coleman Hale, they're the ones who create the individual designs, usually within a line of fabric. So with quilting cottons, a lot of times people want to create quilts with fabrics that are similar to each other. So you can see, like back here, here's a fall quilt, and so I had the border fabric first, and I wanted to create a quilt that had all those colors and things like that to complement the border fabric. I was able to just kind of pick and choose different fabrics on my own, but sometimes having a fabric line, like this is Tula Pink's Homemade. She created a fabric line with all these different types of sewing and notion designs with multiple colorways. So you have blue colorways, green, there's probably a purple and a pink in there too. I don't have those particular ones. And so the reason people will buy different fabric lines for quilting is because it makes it easy to just buy the whole fabric line and then create a quilt out of it. Some people aren't very good at choosing fabrics, or they don't like it. You know, maybe it's hard for you to see different colors together, or maybe you just really like the designer's style and aesthetics. And so, you know, designer fabric like, you know, Homemade by Tula Pink, or, you know, other, let's see, let me grab something else. Or this is let's see what this one is. This is a Ruby Star Society, and then this particular fabric is made in Japan. So this is a very, very silky, soft feeling fabric, and it's also going to be expensive. It's going to be much more expensive than, say, you know, fabric that you went and got over at Joann's. Okay, because they mass produce this fabric. A lot of it is manufactured in China, and they have their own sort of set of designers that work exclusively for them. And so someone, who made this one? I don't want to keep saying the same designer names over and over again. Let me see. So this is Kimberly Kite. So this type of designer usually is freelance, or maybe she has a contract with Ruby Star Society. And you know, she gets to draw in her own styles, basically. She's not having to meet some sort of standard that some of the designers might have to for a big store like Joann's or Hobby Lobby or Walmart. You know, that's mass-produced fabric designed to, drop some fabric, designed to please most people who shop at those stores, like your basic crafters and things like that. So designer fabric is going to be more expensive, but it's going to be easier to work with. Because it has a higher thread count, it maintains its structure really well. So when you're cutting it apart and creating new quilt blocks and things like that, it holds its structure much better. And it just makes it much easier to work with over time, because, you know, you start with a big piece of fabric, you cut it down, you piece it together with other fabrics, and now you have distortion basically. You've handled the fabric, you've moved it around, you've sewn it, because it's a fiber, you know, this isn't brick or wood or something that we're working with. This is fabric. This is fabric and fibers that we're working with. It is very easy to distort them. And so, you know, if you want to, you know, if you're just getting into quilting, there's definitely some less expensive ways to buy nice fabric. Or, you know, you can even, there's methods to work with cheaper fabric too. Some of the best places to get less expensive fabric is going to be Joann's and Hobby Lobby, if you want to just be able to walk into a store. I actually really like going to thrift stores. When I was in college, that's when I started to sew. There was a local SPCA thrift store, and they often had scraps of fabric and things like that for sale, much more, you know, much less expensive. You can also make quilts out of any kind of fabric. You are not limited to using quilting cottons. If you think about the earliest quilts that were made here in America, they would have been patched together from bits of clothing. You know, a pioneer woman wasn't going to go out and buy to the local Joann's and buy a yard of fabric to make a quilt. They were often made with bits of garments that were falling apart. Because if you think about in the 1600s, 1700s, 1800s, women were making the clothes for themselves and for their family. They often made their own fabric and spun their own threads and things like that. So, you know, they spent hours, days, months, maybe even a year, you know, creating a garment. If you think about all the time that went into the whole process of it, they weren't just going to throw away their husband's shirt. They weren't going to just throw away their kid's dress if it wasn't wearable anymore. So what they would do is they would cut it up and create quilts out of it, because then the quilts were functional too. Plus, I mean, it was a great way to make something creative and fun and things like that. And it was just a really great way to repurpose fabrics and things like that. So you are not limited to making quilts out of quilting cottons. It's just the most popular, and it is about the easiest. It takes the least amount of preparation of your fabric to just cut it up and get it ready to go. So a really great way to find cheap fabric is to repurpose old clothes, go to the thrift store. Also, if there's a local quilt show or a quilt guild in your area, they often have boxes of free fabric, because if you are a quilter, more than likely you're a fabric hoarder, because it's fun. It's fun to buy supplies, it's fun to buy fabric, especially when you have stuff with, you know, really cute designs like bananas and strawberries. So you'll get a lot of quilters who are like, they get to a point where they're like, I just want to get rid of it. So check out a local quilt show. There's often a shop at a quilt show where people are selling fabric and notions and patterns and things like that secondhand. You can also find vintage fabrics at quilt shows. Like, I found this really pretty 1960s fabric at one of the first quilt shows I ever went to, and it's really beautiful. It was in great condition, and I've actually used it in a lot of different projects, and I still have a ton of it left. So, I mean, 2 yards of fabric will last you a really long time. It'll really get through a bunch of different projects and things like that. So that's another really great inexpensive way to accumulate fabric, or maybe find fabric for a specific project that you're working on. Okay, so we kind of went over the different types of fabrics there are, right? So there's different synthetic materials, there's knits, there's cottons in different forms, quilting cottons, flannels, muslin, and the easiest way to tell a really nice piece of cotton fabric is to touch it, is to feel it. It's really soft and silky. It's probably an expensive piece of fabric. It probably has a really high thread count. That's kind of like the same with bed sheets. You know, when you go to a nice hotel and you touch the sheets and you feel your hands around, it's all silky soft with the Egyptian, you know, 1,000 thread count sheets. And then you go to a Motel 6 and the sheets are all scratchy and stuff like that. So it's really easy to tell by feel alone a really nice piece of cotton fabric. So now I wanted to talk about some ways to prep your fabric to cut it up and work with it. One of the things that I do is I use a really nice iron. So let me grab that really quick. So you want to use a really nice iron. I have this Black & Decker. Where's the name on it? Oh, here we go. Black & Decker Digital Advantage. I don't know. It's a nice big iron. It has 7 different settings. I can do a spray, I can do a steam, and then I have a steam dial. So if I want the steam to always be on, I have that option for it. It also has something really important called the auto off. Because if you're like me, you like to wander away in the middle of doing tasks. So having an auto off feature on your iron is really nice. Now this is like $100 iron. I think it was actually probably like $130. My husband got it for me for Christmas one year. And so before I had this, I had a really janky iron from probably like the 80s. It was my stepdad's from when he was single. So, you know, it was like a yellow plastic color. It took like 20 minutes to heat up. It didn't have an auto off, so I'd have to remember to unplug it and stuff like that. So, I mean, you can definitely go buy an inexpensive iron. They also have mini irons too, which are really nice for when you're like ironing just your quilt blocks and things like that, little pieces of fabric. I like a big old iron because what I do when I prep my fabric to cut it for quilting is I take my big piece of fabric, and before I even cut it, I iron the whole piece. I usually do a yard at a time. So, you know, if there's 2 or 3 yards that I've gotten, I'll just cut off a yard. I'll lay it on my ironing table. I'll lay it on my ironing table with the selvage, you know, selvage first on my ironing table. And I'll just steam iron the whole piece. I'll just scoot it along and steam, iron the whole piece of fabric. Then what I'll do is the end that I finished on, I will go back through and I'll spray this is called Mary Ellen's Best Press. Basically what it is a lightweight starch. So a starch is a chemical that will help stiffen fabric and make it less likely to distort as you're working with it. The reason why I like this particular brand is because it is really lightweight. It doesn't leave any kind of crusty residue on my fabric, and it's just enough. So that, you know, before I even cut my fabric, I'll just do a quick spray, a really light, you know, right across the piece of fabric, and then I'll go back and steam iron it again. Then when I'm ready to cut my fabric, it's nice and starched and ironed. I'll fold it selvage to selvage. Then I will cut my strips that I need. I'll start cutting my pieces for whatever quilt I'm doing. Now, if I'm making blocks that are going to have diagonals, you know, things that are on the bias, you know, if we're going to be working with triangles, half square triangles, strips and things like that, usually what I'll end up doing is the first 2 pieces that I put together. So say I'm doing a traditional style half square triangle where I have 2 triangles of 2 different colors and I'm putting them together, you know, bias to bias edge. You know, after I've cut the triangles, I might starch them again. I may spray them again, depending on the quality of the fabric or depending on how much I'm going to be working with them. I will starch them again. I'll starch all the triangles and then I'll sew them together. And then when I'm ironing the blocks open, I will often starch them again. You know, that's why I like this one, because it's so lightweight. I feel like I can use it in multiple steps of the quilting process without overworking the material and things like that. Okay, so that's sort of my process in fabric. You know, when I first got started, I used to shop at Joann's only, mostly because I didn't know what was available to me. Now, you know, I like to support my local quilt stores, buying fabric. You can also find fabric online through a ton of different websites. I mean, there's almost too many, to be honest. I personally prefer to buy fabric in person. I like going to a store and walking through the aisles and seeing all the different bolts of fabric. And, it helps me limit myself into how much I buy. Because to be honest, hoarding fabric can become a really big problem really easily. Crafty people in general tend to be people who like to buy supplies. They get inspired by going out and shopping for new materials and things like that. And it can get really overwhelming really quickly because there's only so many quilts you can make in a year. Some people are more prolific than others. I am not. I'm a strong project starter. And so I'm really slow to finish things. Like this quilt behind me, I started it last year. And I literally had to embroider one pumpkin and put the binding on. But I put it away because I just couldn't look at it anymore. And I pulled it out again this year and I quilted a pumpkin and put the binding on, and now it's done. But it literally took me a year to finish this project. Even though the top was done, the 98%, I would say 99% of the quilting, hand quilting, I finished last year. And yet I still couldn't get through it. So you have to know how you work. Some people are the kind of people where they start a project and they work on it until it's complete, and then they can start a new project. If that's you, hoarding fabric probably won't become a problem. If you're like me and you just like, I want to do this, I want to start that. Oh, this, I saw it on Pinterest, I'm so excited. It can become really overwhelming and your stash can kind of get out of hand really quickly. So what I would say is if you're just getting into quilting especially, start with a quilt pattern that you want to make. Start with the first quilt you want to make. Who do you want to make it for? Is it for yourself? That's okay. There's no problem in doing that. Then, pick a pattern that you really enjoy. Go out and pick fabrics that you think will work well for the pattern and just start with that. Finish one quilt at a time and, avoid the fabric stores as much as possible. Try not to buy too much for your stash because you'll often find that you bought something, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 6 years ago when you first got into quilting, and then years later you still haven't used it because you don't really like that style anymore, right? You're not into that anymore, or you bought the fabric without a project in mind, and so now it's just sitting there. You're like, what did I buy this for? I didn't save it with a project, I didn't save it with a pattern or anything. So, if you're like me and you're a strong starter but a slow finisher, I really recommend just finishing one project at a time, only buying fabric for the project you're working on. And, I know that's really hypocritical of me because I have a whole shelves full of fabric here. And just because I got into the bad habit of not doing that. I used to, when I first got into quilting, I would finish one quilt at a time, only buy fabric for that project, and it worked out really well. But now that I have my own sewing room, it's really easy to fill it up with shelves of fabric. Alright, so that's everything I have for you guys today. I just wanted to quickly talk about quilting fabrics, what's the differences, and things like that for you. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me a comment. If you have some online sites that you like to shop at, or maybe some local quilt stores that you love to go to shop for fabric, go ahead and leave them in a comment and let me know. I love to hear where you guys go. Maybe, post some of your favorite manufacturers or your favorite designers. Obviously, I'm a big Tula Pink fan. I have a lot of her stuff. I love Ruby Star Society, all their different fabrics. Rashida Coleman Hale has some beautiful fabrics. But I also have a really eclectic taste. So I have modern stuff. I have vintage fabric. I have reproduction style fabrics. I have more traditional, William Morris style fabrics. So I have a really eclectic taste in fabric. Some people stick to their own different types of styles. So if you have any questions, leave me a comment. Hope you like this video, and there are going to be some more quilting videos coming at you soon. Bye!